The room breathed in a low, mechanical rhythm, and the lights held steady like watchful stars above a fragile planet. Doctors stood behind glass walls of authority, their coats bright, their faces trained into masks of control, and distance power hummed. In panels and monitors and rules and protocols written long before this body lay still on the bed, the center rested a patient wrapped in thin sheets' eyes. Closed chest rising with effort and hope tangled together, closest of all stood a maid. Dressed in dark cloth, her hands steady, her presence quiet yet louder than any machine. She had learned the corridors by heart long before today, learned which floors echoed grief and which smelled of fear. She had cleaned rooms where joy once danced, and rooms where it never returned after the night fell. She had listened without being asked, and remembered without being thanked. Now she stood where permission had not been given, but humanity had opened the door the doctors watched from behind. Their barrier of glass entraining their voices, lowered their steps measured. They trusted machines and charts and numbers that glowed like sacred texts. They trusted power to decide who mattered and when. Yet, in this moment, power waited and knowledge paused. The maid stepped closer to the bed and felt the warmth of the patient through the air. She remembered her own mother lying still in a similar room years ago. She remembered how no one had touched her hand until it was too late. The memory did not wound her now. It guided her. She placed her palm gently against the patient hand, and the world narrowed to skin and breath. No alarm sounded, no rule shattered, yet something ancient awakened the patient, stirred not in body but in spirit. As if recognizing a familiar kindness, the maid spoke softly, words shaped by care, not instruction. She told a story of morning light through kitchen windows and the smell of bread rising. She spoke of work done quietly and love given without witness. The machines recorded small changes and the doctors leaned closer, uncertain. Behind the glass, power shifted, uncomfortably unsure how to measure this. The maid continued, her voice steady like a river that knows its path. She did not ask for miracles. She offered presence time stretched, and the room felt fuller than before. A single tear traced down the patient face and rested at the corner of the eye. The maid noticed and wiped it away with care, learned through years of tending others in that. Touched the patient, found permission to remain. The doctors exchanged glances. Their education silent before the scene. They had studied bodies, not moments like this. Power had no command for what unfolded. The maid breathed with the patient matching. The rhythm teaching without words, her humanity stood unclothed by titles or ranks. She was simply a woman standing for another human being. Outside the glass, the world of decisions waited inside the room, life held on by a thread woven of compassion. The patient heartbeat steadied just enough to be noticed. A monitor chimed softly, and the doctor stepped closer, still unsure. They spoke in measured tones, but their certainty had thinned. The maid did not turn. She stayed focused on the soul before her. She whispered that it was all right to rest or to stay. Choice mattered here more than outcome. The patient fingers tightened around hers, answering in the only language left. Power observed, helpless to interfere in this moment. Hierarchy dissolved. The maid became witness and guardian. Minutes passed. Like pages turning slowly, the room felt warmer, not by temperature, but by meaning. The doctors felt it too, though none could name it. They saw not defiance, but devotion. They saw care stripped of credential, yet rich in truth. The patient breathing grew easier, as if fear had loosened its grip. The maid smiled, not in victory, but in recognition. She had done this before in many ways. Always unseen, always essential. Now even power could not look. Away the glass no longer separated, understanding only bodies. One doctor pressed a hand to the barrier and lowered their head. Another adjusted a chart that suddenly felt less important. The maid spoke again, telling the patient they were not alone. Those words carried weight greater than any prescription. The room answered with silence that felt respectful. Outside, machines continued their duties, indifferent but present. Inside, a human bond anchored the fragile moment. The patient eyes fluttered, opened just a little, enough to see her face. Recognition passed between them like a spark. No history was shared, yet everything was understood. The maid nodded as if to say, "I am here." That was enough. The doctors stepped in quietly, no longer observers, but participants. They moved around the bed, careful not to break the spell. Power receded, taking notes for later. What mattered was now the maid remained closest, until the moment passed naturally. When she finally stepped back, the room felt changed. The patient rested deeper, calmer, held by something unseen. The doctors stood still, absorbing the lesson offered freely. No words could summarize it. The maid turned to leave, returning to her work. Her footsteps soft, her role resumed, yet the space she left behind stayed fuller than before. Behind the glass, power watched, knowing it had witnessed something it could never own. And in that room, humanity had spoken in its clearest voice. The hallway received her quietly, as if aware that something rare had just passed through its air. Her shoes whispered against the floor, carrying echoes of rooms she had yet to clean, and lives she would never fully know. Behind her, the room settled into a new rhythm, slower, steadier, more forgiving. The doctors resumed their roles, yet their movements were gentler, their voices softer. Power returned to its stations, but not unchanged. Something unseen lingered like a question no one could dismiss. The maid moved from room to room, returning beds to order, straightening sheets, aligning objects that pretended to be neutral. She wiped surfaces that held fingerprints of fear and hope mixed together. Each task was familiar, yet her heart carried the weight of the moment she had left behind. She did not name it as courage or mercy to her. It was simply what was needed. In another wing, a nurse paused, noticing the shift in the building mood. A security guard leaned against a wall, feeling unexpectedly thoughtful. Even the elevators seemed to wait longer than usual, as if listening. The hospital breathed as one body touched by something gentle. Back in the room, the patient slept not deeply, but peacefully. Dreams came without sharp edges. There was a sense of being held even without arms around them. The doctors reviewed numbers and charts, yet their eyes returned often to the hand that had been held. They wondered how much of healing lived outside their language. Power convened in offices. Above discussing policies and risks and boundaries, words were spoken carefully, yet meaning slipped between them. No rule could be written for what had occurred. No protocol could capture the simplicity of presence. The maid reached the window at the end of the corridor and paused. Sunlight touched the glass, warming her face. She thought of home, of meals, waiting, of stories left unfinished. She thought of how many moments like this passed unnoticed every day. She did not feel pride, she felt alignment elsewhere. A young intern replayed the scene in their mind. They had entered medicine to help, yet now realized help had many forms. They resolved to listen more closely to what could not be measured. Their path shifted slightly, quietly. Profoundly, the patient stirred hours later and whispered a thank you to no one in particular. The room answered with calm. Recovery would be uncertain, but fear no longer ruled the space. The maid returned near the end of her shift to empty a bin. She glanced once at the bed and met the patient eyes. A small smile passed between them, carrying no demand and no promise. Just recognition. When night came, the hospital lights dimmed, but did not darken. Stories settled into walls, floors, and ceilings. Among them lived this one, a story without rank, without announcement, a story of a woman who stood closest when it mattered most. And though no record would mark her name, the building would remember, the air would remember, and somewhere deep within those who witnessed it, humanity would remain a little closer to the surface.